You were way too vague there. Way too vague. You didn't engage with the hand enough. You didn't engage with the specifics enough. You weren't hand reading. That was the problem. Guys, welcome back to From Losing to Cruising. How are you doing today, Mark?
Great, thanks, Pete. How are you?
Good. I mean, we get to start episode 5 with a less ominous negative spin because we have the first winning week of the challenge posted. How was last week for you?
Pretty good. As you can see, it was up and down, but it feels like my game is improving. I know it's early doors and a lot of it is work in progress, but it definitely feels a lot more confident at the tables.
Excellent. That's exactly what we wanted to hear. Obviously, last time we were talking about the battle to improve your relative hand strength identification, like figuring out how good your hand is given the action sequence, the texture, all of these variables. How did you get on with that, and how did you get on with folding a bit more this week?
I think I'm improving. I may have overcompensated a little bit in some regards, but I think I'm improving. It's still a work in progress, but I'm looking forward to going through some hands today to maybe to answer that question, to be honest, to see where I feel like I'm getting better, but not 100%. I can't put my hand on my heart and say I'm definitely got this down because it's...
Yeah. And what we're looking at today is hands in which you did manage to fold. So the idea of today's session, I guess, is to see, like, are your folds warranted? Are you over adjusting? What we're not going to see in today's session is calls that you've made. So just bear in mind that, that'll be slipping under my radar today. I'm always suspicious of students that when they send me a bunch of folds, it's actually like calls that they've made as well that aren't so good. So, we never know. But let's get into the folds. Let's make sure there's no over adjustment. And let's make sure that you are pulling the trigger and give you some positive reinforcement, because part of the deal last time was I said, bring me some folds. I want to praise you for the good ones. I want you to see that they're a really good achievement, even if they don't feel great at the time. So let's get into it. Ace Jack, Ace of Hearts, Jack of Clubs in the cutoff. Start off with an open. We get 3-bet by the button. And we decide to 4-bet. Thoughts?
I think this is standard enough. It's something I haven't been doing too much always. I wouldn't always have pulled the trigger here, but I don't like call, and I think it's probably indifferent between fold and 4-bet.
Yeah, I would agree. I think ace queen off can obviously call. I think ace jack suited can obviously call, but ace jack off is a little bit too down there. I think king queen off can call. This hand is going to make an okay 4-bet bluff in these positions specifically. I agree. I think you just want to pitch it if you were hijack or under the gun or something. So a worthwhile distinction for the audience. Sizing, how would you link the concept of elasticity in pool to your sizing choice here? Any thoughts on that?
Probably inelastic in terms of the folding range, and that's maybe something I need to consider. Yeah, I could go smaller and still get the same amount of folds, basically.
Yeah, or a similar amount of folds. So yeah, your sizing is very bulbous here. Like, you're making it almost 24 bigs. You're making it more than 3x. I mean, that's pretty unnecessary. I think like 2.5, 2.6 is perfectly fine for your out of position 4-bets. And as you say, I just don't think it's gonna... Your opponents aren't robots that are like magically reacting the right way. They're not like elastic bands that are just moving as much as you pull them. They're kind of rigid, and they maybe suddenly snap if you go way too big. But the difference between going this size and going like 20, there's just not going to be much. Yeah, so 20 big blinds here, 21 big blinds here would be absolutely plenty. No need to go bigger. Okay, so king jack deuce comes. What's your rough game plan on a flop like this in a 4-bet pot?
Rough game plan is I'm betting with my entire range for 20% sizing, usually in a 4-bet pot.
So in the Carrot Poker School, I actually teach this in grade 3, and I kind of say you can either range check or range bet pretty much every flop without EV loss. Like, if you test that in a solver that's not going to lose theoretical EV by playing all of your range in the same way, whether that be betting or checking on the boards that are really good for you, you're going to want to bet all of your range. And on some boards that are very bad, such as 8-7-6, 7-6-5, rainbow, things like this, you can begin checking everything. But this is definitely a board where betting range is going to be my plan as well, so I like it. So we bet, and villain goes for this little raise. Okay, so already we're on a really bizarre, like, infrequent branch of the tree. Could you give me a little bit of, I guess, hand reading here? Like, what? Let's cut straight to the chase. Like, what do you think is going on here in reality? Like, what is the true situation here of villain's range, rather than saying like, oh, what's the theoretical raising range meant to be here? Because I don't think there's meant to be one, right? I don't think this play is really a thing in theory. So what do you think it's likely to look like in practice?
I think it's likely to be very strong in practice.
Can you be a bit more specific? Because this is a 4-bet pot, so ranges are very narrow. So what do you mean? Like, what are the strong hands that you're expecting to see?
I mean, sets.
More specifically.
King.
No. Let's go back to pre.
That's gonna 5-bet. Yeah.
So you're being way too vague here. See how your hand reading is so vague here that it's actually just becoming really inaccurate already. Like, we're in a 4-bet pot and we have to adjust the contrast of that to like a 3-bet pot or single raise pot, and we have to understand that villain's range pre-flop doesn't automatically smash this board very often. Like, deuces are not 3-betting pre on this node here, so deuces are gone. They're out basically for all practical purposes. Kings are out because they shove over the 4-bet almost always. Jacks, I'm not sure. You block a jack and it's not certain to me that they shove over the 4-bet, you know. I think they will jam pre sometimes. So I'll ask you again, what are these hands that are so strong here?
Aces can be here sometimes.
Possibly. Possibly. I'm not sure people do that very often in these sort of stakes, in these sort of games. I would say, well, there are 3 combos of aces, and I would say that like giving villain one of them on average is probably about right, if that, maybe less. What else?
So are you thinking that this is not strong?
Well, I'm questioning your statement that it's strong. I want you to justify it or abandon it, basically.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much else that I can think. I mean, queens, tens. I guess when I consider it now, strong, there aren't actually that many strong combos, given blockers and given the preflop action. So maybe it's more likely in terms of combinatorically, it's more likely to be queens, tens, nines that are just small, want to try to look strong and take the pot down.
I think we should avoid giving villain like really specific reasoning for making bizarre raises with tens or queens. I think the hand you're going to see here by far the most often is ace queen, by far, because combinatorically it's a lot of combos, right? If villain has ace queen off here and ace queen suited, okay, you have one of the aces, but there's still 4x3. There's still like 12 combos of ace queen here base. Ace queen is a hand furthermore that can bluff, so raising the flop with ace queen is not like totally ridiculous. I think you'll also see some very strong hands like pocket jacks. Like, I think you will see that one combo of the time. I think you will see some hands like king queen occasionally. I just don't think queens, tens, nines, like I agree with you that there are a lot of base combos. Like, that's a lot of villain's range for getting to the flop. But good hand reading is about putting everything together from pre-flop, and that's what we're not doing well enough yet. So next episode, I want you to actually focus on hands where you want to hand read your opponent. I want to get better at this skill, because pre, we need to be saying, okay, we need to be looking at flop and glancing backwards to pre-flop, if that makes sense. Like, kind of saying villain doesn't have kings, they don't have deuces, they have one combo of jacks, maybe. They have one combo-ish of aces, maybe. And then there's all this ace queen. And it's like, how do you avoid over bluffing if you just have the thought of raising ace queen here? So really, there's 2 types of players in the pool. There's ones that never bluff, that just have the one combo of jacks or have king queen or slow played ace king here, or slow played aces. And then there are ones who are just like clicking it back with ace queen or ace 10 and are grossly over bluffing. Because the combinatorics point so far towards it being lopsided towards bluffs, I would say that even if most people don't bluff here, when you run into someone who does, they will be over bluffing by such a gross margin that I would consider the spot over bluffed globally. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense, yeah.
But the reason that you're faltering is you're being so incredibly vague that you're not actually hand reading at all. There's a time to be vague. Like, if you're like on the flop and you're saying, I think I have a range advantage, so I want to bet everything, that's a good time to be vague. It wouldn't be helpful like on the flop in a single raise pot to be like, villain can have 8-7, he can have pocket fours, he can have king 6 suited. Like, going into all of that on some random flop in a single raise pot doesn't make any sense. But going into it here when villain has just defined an extremely narrow range makes a lot of sense to be more specific. So specificity is the lesson of this node. So absolutely I would call here. Okay. Check, check. Check it. And your thought process now. I want to hear your thought process at the time, and then feel free to revise it in light of what we've said.
My thought process at the time was that the min raise on the flop was strong, and therefore I fold here because I don't think I'm good 25% of the time against a likely this is a king and better. That was my thought process at the time.
Okay.
Now, having heard what you said, considering the check behind on the turn, it maybe weights them even more towards ace queen than the jacks or kings. Yeah, well, I mean, those hands can check back, but they do want to get the money in.
Do you mean pocket jacks and king X there when you say that?
Sorry, I mean king X and pocket jacks.
Okay.
Yeah. And aces was the one combo, let's say, of aces that they might have.
Okay.
I think they keep betting mostly with those hands on the turn, and so I think there's a risk they're over bluffing here.
Okay, so let's do a bit of combinatorics. So if villain was capable of bluffing ace queen on the flop, there are 12, with you having the ace of hearts, 12 base combos of ace queen for villain to select from. There are further 3 combos of ace 10. There are some combos of 10-9. There are some combos of queen 10 suited, right? All of these hands are possible, although some of them may fold pre-flop, some of them won't. Overall then, that's approaching about 20 bluff combos. Now they will be discounted because a lot of people you will run into the net that just doesn't bluff the flop here. That's going to be a phenomenon that you will encounter. But if there's 20 base combos, let's say that 1/4 of people are bluffing. Let's say that only 1/4 of them exist and slash them by that huge margin. Say that there's only 5 of those combos left now of ace queen, queen 10, collectively 10-9, etc. When we get to the river then, well, you need 25% here to call half pot. Villain still has, even if we've slashed the bluffs dramatically, we've slashed them in 4, Villain still has 5 combos of bluffs ostensibly, and then there's still only 1 combo of jacks, 1 combo of aces. King queen suited is 3 combos maybe. Like, how are we getting up to 10 value combos here after they've checked turn? I just don't see it. So even if we're like, you don't know how often someone is bluffing, you don't know how often pool is bluffing this node, there's no data on this node, there's no way of knowing for sure. But that doesn't mean that you can't use a deductive, logical, sound thought process to ascertain whether call is likely to be profitable. You can. And the way to do that is to think about landing range, which is drowning in air, drowning in ace queen, not combinatorically in absolute terms, but relative to the value. It's massively outweighing the value. And then saying, okay, well, just how adverse to bluffing would the pool need to be here in order to actually be under bluffing? And I think the answer is like incredibly adverse to bluffing, given just how many value combos they have. It's hardly anything. What do you know about bet, check, bet in a single raise pot? Have you any idea like whether that's overbluffed or underbluffed? Just curious, I'm not sure whether you'll know this or not.
Instinct would tell me that it's probably overbluffed.
It is, yeah. It is overbluffed generally.
Yeah.
Not in every spot, but in many, many spots. Data shows us that bet, check, bet is a line that is just basically fairly weak. People aren't doing a great job of bringing value combos to the table in that line. So I think long story short, this is an incredibly profitable call because the line here is just too bizarre. There's too many base combos. There aren't enough value combos being represented by this action. And sure, you may call here and you're against Joe Bloggs, and Joe Bloggs is never bluffing. Joe Bloggs just always has king queen. Good for him, good for Joe Bloggs. There's a lot of people in the pool here who are bluffing, and that's what you have to remember. One other thought process, and I'm directing this to a very specific individual. I don't know their name, but whoever you are that was in my chat and my stream yesterday morning, Thursday, the 22nd of September, you said, sir/madam, lol, it's 50 NL, just move on and fold, lol. I say to you, no. No. Quick summary though, you were way too vague there. Way too vague. You didn't engage with the hand enough. You didn't engage with the specifics enough. You weren't hand reading. That was the problem. Agreed?
Agreed.
Next spot, king queen in the small blind. Open, get 3-bet. We call the 3-bet. We can do this. We can 4-bet. It doesn't really matter. All good. Onto the flop. Check. C-bet. Call. Fine. Onto the turn. C-bet. Call. Onto the river. Check. Jam. And fold. Okay. Let me go straight to the river. Let's hear your thought process here.
My thought process is triple barrel 2.5 Broadway is under bluffed. I have a bluff catcher. Fold.
Yeah, I think that's a great thought process. And I think you're right. 2.5 Broadway is incredibly scary because when you think about a board like King, Jack, 9, it's just that bit harder for villain to have air. They can have ace 10, they can have ace queen. Apart from that, I'm struggling to see natural bluff combos. Bearing in mind, people aren't in love with following through with like ace 4 of diamonds on the river and things like that. Meanwhile, pre-flop, there's also a leak, and this is how hand reading works, guys, right? To get really good at hand reading, you have to be like a kind of like a radar, like you're scanning all the way through the action sequence of the hand and you're waiting for something. You're like a scanner at an airport and you're scanning someone to see if they've got like, I don't know, a gun on them or something, and you scan like everywhere, and as soon as it beeps you like go, okay, I'm gonna investigate that a little bit further, right? So I'm kind of scanning through villain's range here, trying to like detect things that could be out of whack in one direction or the other, meaning they could be too tight, too loose by the time they get to the river, overbluffing, underbluffing. And when I scan through the pre-flop portion of villain's line here, it beeps, it's like dee-dee-dee. And the idea here for me is that people in the big blind at 50 NL on iPoker, no offense to iPoker, but I don't think it's as tough a pool as like stars would be, probably. Correct me if I'm wrong. You didn't correct me, so I'll assume I'm right. Excellent.
It's more aggressive. I've looked at the data. It's more aggressive. They're more aggressive 3-betting by about 1%.
So that's very specific, but I guess what I mean is that people probably aren't constructing the right form of 3-bet range here, because the 3-bet range that you should be using in the big blind against small blind is incredibly polarized, which means that if you're against a competent player, they might be bluffing enough on the river by virtue of having enough like queen deuce or something, or it's even hard here, like ace 5 off or something like that, right? They might be 3-betting enough of those hands. I don't think most regs that play these stakes on any site, iPoker aside for now, are finding enough of those like lower end bluffs in the big blind. I think they're 3-betting way too linear because they don't know what they're doing, quite frankly. And because of that, I think we actually end up on the river against a range that closer resembles like a small blind versus button 3-bet range than it does a B versus B GTO 3-bet range. So for that reason, it's even harder for them to be bluffing here. I think this is a mandatory fold. I think calling down here in pool is really bad because, yeah, there just aren't enough natural bluff combos. There's a lot of value combos, and the fact that they've misconstructed on average on the first street here at pre-flop, it's really gonna make it hard for them to have those natural bluff candidates like ace 4, like queen 3, queen 4, whatever it happens to be.
That makes sense. That all makes sense.
So what we could actually say here then is, good job. You have folded in a spot you may not have folded before. This is the sunlight through the cracks. This is the hope. This is the prosperity of your game. And while I tore you apart a bit for the first hand because you were sloppy and lazy and vague, in this hand you have been to the point, direct, accurate. You've looked at the right factors and only the right factors. There's been no waffling. The first hand was like a 2 out of 10 for your thought process. This hand is like I'd probably close to a 10. To be quite honest, I can't really give you any, I can't really pull you up for anything here because while there isn't much to say here, you said everything that needs to be said. And I think like part of being a good poker player is saying everything that needs to be said without saying anything that doesn't need to be said. It's like kind of not being exhaustive just for the sake of it, just being exhaustive to the point where you're saying things that matter. And I think that's what we've done.
Is that a tear in your eye, Pete?
No, I've got cold, so a little bit of congestion. Moving on swiftly. If I ever cry because a student, I cry because students do badly all the time. I don't think I've ever cried because a student's done well. King Jack, okay, small blind, 3-bet against button seems good. Villain calls. King 10-7. Are you range betting here?
I am range betting here.
For the audience's benefit, that means we're betting everything in our range because we deem the board to be very high EV for us. And there are a bunch of theoretical reasons we go into in the Carrot Poker School about why you want to bet at high frequency in these spots. It's not as obvious as you may think. Guys, I really think that poker has been a badly taught subject for a long time. So many courses, training sites out there that give you an absolute medley of different random content day after day. There's no structure, there's no organization. You're jumping from one thought to another by following along with a live play session. There's almost nothing that's created in a pre-prepared academic way, and that's why I was so incentivized to bring you the Carrot Poker School. Not only do we use presentations to make sure that all ideas are actually translated into concepts, figures, graphics, and hand examples and give you the right amount of each, but we also make sure that the syllabuses of our courses flow from episode to episode, not moving at a pace that you guys can't handle. The Carrot Poker School is fully comprehensive. It takes you from the start to the end. By the time you've completed grade 3, there's really nothing that you don't know about the theory of cash game poker. This is so much more efficient than just watching training content from a subscription site that bombards you with random stuff every day. Carrot Poker School will make sure that you learn at the right pace and that there's absolutely nothing missing in your game. We do not bombard you with extra information that you don't need. We just give you everything you need, and that's a lot, and that's why the Carrot Poker School is 33 hours long. We lead you down the path to success gradually and carefully, making sure that you get feedback every step of the way. This is a revolutionary course, guys. I'm incredibly proud to have brought it to you, and you can check it out over at carrotcorner.com. You can save £500 today by picking up our full scholarship and learning cash game poker the right way. 10 turn. How do you sort of rate this turn compared to the average turn? How is it going to swing the EV of range versus range here?
I don't think this is a bad turn for us. This is a good turn for the caller on the flop, so that's why I check, I think.
So we are jumping the gun a little bit here. When you go into the tank about whether a turn is good for you or bad for you, and you emerge from that tank with a verdict of like, this is the bad turn, what that does is it sets your betting frequency lower than it would be ordinarily. Yes. If you're not range checking the turn, you might still want to consider, okay, is my hand a value bet? You can still have some value bets on this turn. Like if you have a 10 here, you can bet. If you have a boat, you can bet. If you have aces, you can bet. If you have ace king, I'm sure you can bet. King jack, I don't know. King queen, you can probably bet. King jack, maybe it's a pure check, I don't know. But I think what we should say is, we now have a range disadvantage, therefore yes, we're going to polarize, we're going to bet very selectively, and the bottom of my value range will be somewhere, and I will be mixing when I have ace king or aces here, or quads or a set. I will be mixing bet and check. I won't be pure betting them because those are optional bets in these spots, right? So King Jack, I think, is probably a bit too loose to value bet for like B75 here. It's maybe like slightly too thin. So check seems good, but I don't want to go straight from we have an EV disadvantage to therefore I'm checking my hand, because my hand might be an exception. It might be one of the hands I can still value bet or still bluff. Range disadvantage, it sets the bar for your vague, rough strategy. It does not necessarily immediately tell you what to do with your hand. Okay, so we check, we face this bet. Your thoughts, please.
I think the sizing is larger than I was expecting. I'd expect to be probed a bit here, although the sizing gave me cause for concern. I expected maybe to see a third pot sizing quite a lot of the time on that card. So I think I call, but my antenna's up, I guess.
Yeah, and we can definitely make calls when we're not super thrilled about it, but we think that calling is better than folding, bearing in mind that folding equates to losing what we've invested in this pot in its entirety, invested in making none of the pot that's currently in front of us. So if we think by investing the 20.18 BBs here that we can get back 23 BBs, well, that's miserable and we shouldn't feel good about it, but it's better than getting back nothing, right? It's better than just folding. We get plus 3 BBs from calling. So yeah, I think it's one of these ones where calling is clearly plus EV. It won't be by loads, but it'll be by enough that it's beyond reasonable doubt, and we should just flick it in here. One thing I would say is that I think the sizing makes sense. I don't really know how healthy it is to be thinking about what sizing you were expecting. I don't think it actually matters. I think you should just be like reacting to the size in front of you. Furthermore, I think this is a reasonable size for villain to use, because if you think back to grade 1 lecture 8 of the Carrot Poker School, now that you've done my academic school, it's cool I can sort of link you back to things to look at, and that's all about float betting the flop. This is a turn float bet, a turn stab, right? That lecture is about stabbing the flop. But that lecture is all about how to construct a sizing that gels with your value range, i.e. the hands that you would want to reopen the pot for value with in position. And here, I don't think it makes sense for villain to really want to bet pocket 8, 7x, pocket 9s, do you?
Oh.
So if his value range is king, queen plus or something, why wouldn't he want to bet a bit bigger? Wouldn't that make sense?
Yeah.
So why were you expecting third pot?
I think maybe it's pool, maybe an expectation that I've built up over time that
fair.
When I tend to see these probes after I check behind, it's or I check in this type of spot, I just see a smaller probe. That's all.
Okay, so this is a float bet. A probe would be out of position, just so we don't confuse people too much. But yeah, I know what you mean. That's fair. I would say that there are lots of spots where the third pot is good for in position here, mainly where they want to be making value bets that are thinner, value denial bets with like pocket pairs on lower textures, where they want to be. They're making thinner value bets, essentially. Here, they're not really making thin value bets. They just want to be value betting thickly. That's the difference. So we call. Queen on the river, we check, they jam, and we use our newfound ability, our newfound superpower. It's like when some superhero is like just a kid and they're going to school in the morning with their backpack and their juice and their books and pens, and then suddenly they realize that they can morph into a wolf. And they do it all the time and they have fun with it. It's like one of those shows, right? And you've just realized that you can fold. You have this ability to not fear being bested, run over, bullied, and you're now finding the fold button. Do you like this fold, or would you rescind this fold? What do you think?
I like it. I think I like it, yeah. It's 4 flush or 4 Broadway board and they're shoving all the money in, and I think it's very underbluffed in my population.
So there's a few reasons why it's underbluffed. First off, it's not 4 Broadway, it's 3 Broadway. The 2 10s aren't separate, unique Broadways. But yes, this is very underbluffed for a few reasons. Firstly, if we go back to flop, villain has filtered here in a passive way. When someone filters passively, they condense a bit and most of the total air from their range is gone. So you wouldn't expect villain to call this flop bet with ace-8 of clubs or something of that nature, right? So some of the air is already shed. Then they've bet the turn, okay, fine, that's an aggressive action. Then there's a further aggressive action. So when you see like a calling condensing action followed by 2 aggressive actions, that's not often going to be an overbluffed spot. That's usually going to be either balanced or underbluffed by pool, because it's harder to bluff a lot when you've already filtered your range by calling the flop, yeah?
Yeah.
So when we get to the river, the fact the river is a queen is like the absolute nail in the coffin, and it takes it from being an ambiguous, like maybe slightly underbluff spot to just a completely no-brainer, very underbluff spot that we must fold bluff catchers in against pool. Not only that, but villain has also overbet. Villain just has like pocket 7s. Good for villain. Happy days. Well done, villain. You're not getting our money, yeah? You're not getting it. Bye. Good job. How does it feel to not give people your money when they're butchering a spot, when they're basically failing to bluff often enough, and it's now clear based on your poker education that they're failing to bluff off enough? How does it feel to be besting them by not giving them that money that you used to give them?
It does feel great. Yeah, it does. In the moment, it feels like you win the hand.
And if you go back to lesson 1 of this series, if you haven't watched the first 4 episodes of From Losing to Cruising, where have you been, guys? Where have you been? Go back and watch them. But in the first episode, we quickly identified that Mark had this leak of calling too often. And we basically said, think about the worst case scenario you're trying to protect yourself from, i.e. being bluffed, being bested. Think about the optimal response, how you should handle yourself here. This is under bluff, therefore I'm going to fold. This is me besting them. And thirdly, think about the upside. The upside of finding these folds is feeling good about yourself, feeling like you're beating your opponents and not the other way around. Because poker is a war, not a battle. So the fact that you have actually made the right play here, even though you lost this pot and you lost the battle, you're winning the war by doing this, right? And you're meant to lose lots of pots along the way. So this is excellent. Good.
Yeah, I care less about the feeling. I care more about the 102 big blinds that I saved. that's the bit that actually after the hand I feel I've just made 102 big blinds here, because I would have called that before.
But that makes you feel good, right? And if it didn't make you feel good, you wouldn't care about it. So however much we want to be like, I care, money matter, feeling no matter. Like however much we want to be like that, like actually you only ever do things as a human when you have like emotions like positive or negative swaying you. And yeah, maybe like the money and grinding out of this stake and building your bankroll motivates you, but that makes you feel good. And if it didn't make you feel good, you wouldn't do it. So I really want you to feel good. I don't want you to downplay how good it feels to play well.
That's good. Yeah.
Pocket Jacobies in the small blind, 3-bet it up, min 4-bet, cry. Let's just cry. When we're done crying, we can figure out what to do. What should we do?
I don't know whether I can get to the point of folding here, but I think I just call. I'm not happy instantly, but
yeah.
And I'm very cautious. Their range is quite narrow, I feel.
So what if I become a chat pro? Let's do an interaction of Mark versus chat pro. I'll be the chat pro, you be Mark.
Yeah, it's a jam. GTO Wizard says that you should jam here. Lol.
I should jam, yeah, out of position.
GTO Wizard says.
Yeah, the problem is that they haven't got Pool, as you said earlier, Pool is doing this more linearly than they should be. They're less polarized they should be. They don't have the ace-5 as much as they should. They have all full combos of the aces and kings, and they just have less combos of the lower end of the polarized range. Therefore, I think jamming into a polarized range here is not a good idea. We're going to get called off by aces, kings, and maybe ace-king if we're lucky.
I have been bested.
So yeah, you win against the chat pro. I'd say it's a good response. The thing I would say is that not all chat pros sound like that, so sometimes there'll be one that sounds different to that, so just be careful, guys, in the wild. Secondly, I would say I agree with almost all of that. I think the biggest part of it by far is that the pool is underbluffing this node, but it's not just the pool that's underbluffing, because see if this 4-bet had been the thing you're missing that I think we really have to add is the sizing or line equals player type equals read paradigm. That kind of thought process is what we have to start using here, because had this 4-bet been to 26.21, that's probably like a nerdy reg that's like, this is the optimal sizing, right? That's probably who that is. But when you see this, someone just literally min clicking it back, who is this fellow? Like, who is this? Who is this man or woman or person who's doing this? What kind of player are they?
They're probably more recreational.
Yeah, you've sat at the live table before in your puff, yeah?
Yeah, not much, but yeah.
A little bit. You've seen like poker on TV. You've watched like the Poker Stars Twitch channel and seen like the live tourneys with all the bad players in them, all those bad tourney players. How often do they, I'm kidding by the way if you're a tourney player, no offense. How often do they cold for min 4-bet bluff? Like how often do they wake up with like the king 10 suited here and just go, aha, let's click it back with the king 10 suited? It's just not in their inventory really. So I think jam is actually out here. Jam is the GTO play in these positions 100% of the time. Like this is just clear shove. And the thing you're also a little bit wrong about is that just because villain is polarized, that doesn't mean that jam isn't okay, because there's a lot of dead money. And actually, people can 4-bet call off 10s in this spot and stuff in GTO. That's another reason why the real world and the GTO world are really different. That's probably just not happening in the real world. But yeah, I love everything else that you said. I think it's really good, and I think you should just be defaulting to call here. Can we bring ourselves to fold? I don't think so. Like, for one, we almost just have the implied odds to just look to see if we hit a jack against the sizing. Secondly, villains for sure gonna have some ace king and stuff like that, and maybe even wider sometimes. I don't think we can jam. I also don't think we can fold. I think we just have to take a peek. But also try and be aware here that your EV is close to 0 when you make this call. Like, you invest 12 bigs here, and you probably get back like 12 bigs plus a few cents, you know? It's not like you get back a lot more than that, so totally fine. We call, and the flop comes 10-8-5, villain bets small, and yeah, ordinarily GTO would be like, raise a ton here, like get it in, it's fine, value protection, but again, we're making our read pre-flop that we shouldn't do that, so I love your call. If you had jammed the flop here, it would be a little inconsistent with your pre-flop read that they were massively under bluffing. Check, check. Interesting. King river, jam. Okay. You stand by this one?
Yeah, for me it was just, okay, ace king. I'm happy with it. I'm very happy with it. I think ace king gets there, and that could be a decent chunk of their range. And they have aces and kings still. I think this is a clear fold.
Yeah, I think this is a great thought process by you again. I mean, pre-flop, we have given them a really tight range. We didn't think that with the sizing pre, there was going to be a lot of hands like ace 4 in there. Anyway, if they were bluffing pre-flop, they will often have a king in their hand. I don't think it's likely they were bluffing in the first place. Ace queen could do this, sure, but I just don't think it's super likely. And apart from ace queen, you know, you're just not going to see very many bluffs here. And I just think this is really consistent with how you've hand read this section of the pool's line so far. So yeah, really good folds today. I would say that, like, overall, we've had a really solid session. I can see why the graph is starting to turn itself around a little bit. So while variance has had clearly a big say in like how you've done over a period of 20,000 hands, like it's always going to dictate things largely, I do think that you're now giving yourself the chance to have these kind of weeks or these kind of fortnights. I think previously, with the amount of big blunders you were making in large pots paying off under bluffed spots, you'd have had to run very well to have a week like this, whereas now you maybe only need to run a bit well to have a week like this, and I think that's the big difference. Anything you want to add before we wrap up today's installment of From Losing to Cruising?
The only other thing I would say in terms of looking at this sort of 2-week time frame is that my play was easier is one word, but maybe less atrocious, because when previously making those calls, losing the 102 big blinds, it would have taken its toll on my mental game.
Yeah.
And I think now part of why I'm feeling so comfortable and a lot more solid is by I'm able to make that fold, and then I'm not getting any after effects from it. I'm happy.
Yeah.
And I'm not, you know, so it's not as much of a trudge as it is actually, okay, this is good, let's keep going. So I'd say I got in a lot of hands in this fortnight, and it didn't feel like a lot of hands, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great word. Atrocious is like one of the best adjectives I've ever heard. I've never used that word. I'm going to add it to my inventory because it's fantastic. But yeah, the attrition of just like getting beaten up, putting yourself through the emotional blender. Can I call here? Can't I? Feeling desires, justifying said desires with thoughts that you know aren't very good thoughts, calling, getting punished immediately, feeling bad about yourself. It's so hard to pick yourself up when you go through that cycle. It's almost like getting off of a horrible drug. And I think you're beginning to do that now. You're beginning to feel the freedom for folding that you need to have, and you're beginning to feel the satisfaction from folding, because when you make a fold and you lose a pot that you could have lost a bigger pot and your opponent's under bluffing, you're beating them, not the other way around. On that happy note, let's wrap it up, and we'll see you back here for episode 6 next Tuesday of From Losing to Cruising. Thanks, Mark. Take it easy, man.